Promenades, peristyles, the streets and lanes of the city, the highways, the Dia Exodus. What do these things mean? They're very significant, very profound, and they are sacred architecture in the millennial temple, referred to by Christ. And they are significant for those worshiping Him in the inner court, waiting for His return at the first resurrection. So, as you have seen in previous videos, we have discussed the outer court, we've discussed the 30 chambers, and now we're going to discuss the pillars and the streets and lanes of the city. Streets and lanes of the city, you guys know how I'm always saying that the place where we're staying, it reflects, things in the temple. So here you can see the road, and it does. So we're going to show you how the place we're staying is an ancient house that the priests used to live in when they served in the church. And the road you can see I'm walking on, you'll notice here, that's the road I was walking on. But then you'll notice here, an upper part, and here you can see the church. Okay, so you can see this is what we're going to call the inner court, and this is what we're going to call the outer court. Okay, so even here, this is reflecting what we can see. So this, where we are here, this is west, this is the western position, and we're on the road in the outer court. And as we said, in the outer court, it will have the 30 chambers, and we'll have the peristyles, and it will have everything in the outer court, pillars and rooms, and there's also things, boiling houses, and the gates. All right, so here we're just going on a stroll, and here you can see the village. Again, up above will be the church, and we're going to walk around the outer court area. All right, and in it we can see that there are various buildings. Some you can see up there, some you see here, more or less just easily representing for us the roads, the lanes of the city, and as well the 30 chambers. Okay, so now in this view you can see that the church is up much higher. I walk down the stairs, I'm in the lower level, and these are the courtyards, the outer, and if you position the temple, there would be pillars there. But that's what they call the church, ecclesia, yes, but also naos, meaning temple. So we can't quite see it yet, but we're walking around the outer court area, and there's buildings, there's houses here, and some of them, they go back to several hundred years, and they go back to the priests that had lived here and served in the church. So now we're approaching the church entrance here from the east, walking up these stairs, and here you can see the building, and this is the bell, the old church bell. It's not in use anymore. There's a nice one up there, but this is a church. And then the place we're staying is very close by, but now you can see the area around it is a courtyard. You see the courtyard very well there. And so that courtyard is going to be in the inner court, and we're going to call that the streets and lanes of the city of the inner court. And then we have the outer court, which is the road area that you see down below there. So isn't that amazing? That again, just whether it be inside the house or outside, we're getting things that are reflective of the architecture of the temple. And here is, of course, the temple itself. We have the doors, the entrances to it, and we have the courtyard here, and also here which you can see. So in this one, we continue to talk and discuss the temple and the courtyards, the inner court, and it's very significant because that's who is in the first resurrection, bringing the poor, the maimed, the blind, the halt, okay? And they're serving. The reason all this is, we're going through all this trouble, explain all this, it's the people that are serving as priests in the inner court. They're the ones in the first resurrection. They're the first ones at the wedding supper. Okay, go out into the streets, lanes of the city. Okay, meaning the inner court. So here we're looking at the inner court, and this is the inner courtyard next to the king's house. There's actually two of these, and you can see we're calling it a promenade. It's a walkway with covered pillars, and a covering, and it is connecting the two buildings. Scribe's chamber there you see on your left, and the road passes to our right to the north chamber. So we have other videos where we've discussed the scribe's chamber. We have discussed the north chamber. So now you are familiar with those, and now we're discussing the fact you see a road here. In this view becomes very clear there is a road within this courtyard. And there's also a hedge. There's a wall there as well on either side. Okay, these are the references to what Christ is talking about. The hedge, the wall, okay? Go into the hedges of the city. All right, go into the streets and lanes of the city. So this is the courtyard area. That's the king's house we're looking at. And next to it, the scribe's chamber. And this is the inner courtyard, okay, with the promenade. The streets and lanes of the cities, the promenades, and the peristyles. Okay, let's get another view here of the temple complex. You guys are going to be experts in this, but let's just go over once again the two areas that we're going to discuss here. And one of them is in the outer court, and it's a row of pillars that runs along here, and these green boxes are the 30 chambers. So that is one area or square, which we call the outer court, and in it we have rows of pillars. And then we're going to talk about another square, another place with, it does have a road. We're not showing it here, but there's a road that passes from here through the north chamber into an open square and then into the porch of the scribe's chamber. So these are the two places of focus. We're going to see that this wall here, all right, is the hedges. Go into the hedges and go into the lanes of the city. So this is the wedding supper parable. And within it, we're getting the actual architecture of the temple. And so the orders and instructions in his servants are to go out and send a message to those that are in the temple complex, those that are serving as priests. Those that are serving as priests, they're the poor, the maimed, the blind, the halt. They're the ones taken in the resurrection. So, of course, in this graphic, we have to familiarize ourselves with where it is we're looking at. Even when we look at the 3D model and we look at things up close, we have to have a big picture overview of what it is we're looking at. And here you can see in our sketches of the 30 chambers how we discussed the court of the priests and the court of pillars. So this is the pillars, of course, we keep showing you. But this is very important information, and very important that we get all of our measurements and details right, because it certainly does relate to a prophetic story. In our last video, we talked about the hollow pillars, the royal library, the treasury, and in it we kind of introduced the idea and concept of the promenades and peristyles. And that's why we wanted to follow up this message after that one. And we want to go over what we discussed there. So when we looked at the promenades, we were looking at a road, and the road goes inside the north chamber. All right, the road passes to the scribe's chamber, and that's what we were discussing. So before the north chamber, before the chamber, was a walk of 10 cubits. Okay, now the Septuagint calls that walk a promenade, peripatos in the Greek. And in Jerusalem, there's covered walkways called cardos. Okay, and so what we're suggesting is that even in Christ's time, he's using the language in the wedding supper parable of things that existed at that time. And so we're suggesting that these promenades are these roads that went throughout Jerusalem, and they also go out throughout the temple complex in the Ezekiel temple. So as we said, these are the streets and lanes of the city. And they're in the outer court, Ezekiel 40, 17, and 18. The outer court, there was a pavement, which the Septuagint calls peristyles. So there's a road, which is a promenade, which is a covered walkway, cardos, and there are peristyles, and these are also rows of columns that go around about in a court. Okay, so these we're going to look at, of course, in the outer court, as we've explained, but both of these details will be very prominent and clear to us once we look at the inner court. Thus, the promenade and peristyles continue from the north and south chambers to the hollow of the porch of pillars. Okay, and we looked last week and saw how there was a columned porch or pillars, stylos, that joined together the north chamber to the Hall of Pillars, or scribe's chamber, the royal library. Okay, so last week we introduced these words, promenade and peristyles, as architectural detail elements that now we're going to take a step further and look more at what they mean. And as we go throughout our presentation, we're very excited, of course, be able to present this to you in 3D, looking at the inner court. Now you can see this clearly. That's the inner court area, the inner courtyard, okay, the square, and now we're in the outer court, and now we can see the outer courtyard, and the rows of pillars covered by porches going around. So we're facing west at this point. Now we begin to face south, and throughout this you can see this large outer court area, which we will look at as the di-exodus. Yes, the same word for exodus is also the di-exodus, all right, meaning the outer court. So here you can see all the rows of pillars and porches. That is the gate to the south. And then we begin to turn and face towards the east. So that is the east, and we are looking at the peristyle. Okay, remember how we saw this was a sundial, but in this one, we're looking at it as a peristyle. Now, in looking at our notes for this week, the streets, the square, the lanes of the city, the promenades, and the peristyles, we're going to take the time and go into both how the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, confirms the wedding supper parables and fills in the gaps to tell us a very, very important prophecy in Daniel, in the Psalms, and elsewhere, which show us precisely the fulfillment of Christ's parables. That's our real goal here, is to understand what Christ said in the parables. Okay, they're mysteries. They're things that we have to go through this process to interpret, and that is a word study. The Septuagint is very beneficial to us because we are able to have a direct connection, word to word, of what Christ is saying and recorded in the Gospels in Greek with the Greek Old Testament with the same precise words. That's why we keep doing this. So there's going to be some words we're going to say. Some of it you're familiar with. You're familiar with the word Exodus. We're going to look at the word Exodus, and we're going to look at it in terms of a street or an outer court, okay? You might not have thought of that, but once we look at the word Exodus, it does exist in the Old Testament as the children of Israel doing an exodus out of Egypt, yes, but we'll see a couple examples of how it also means a street. Very exciting. So we'll also look at the lanes of the city, we'll look at the hedges, okay, and then once again connect this all together in prophecy, even unto Daniel chapter 9. So you can see in our notes, the dia Exodus is the outer court. So when we looked at the area of the outer court, that is the pillars, and this understanding we can get when we look at Matthew 22, which is the wedding supper parable, verse 9. Go into the highways. So highways here in Greek is die Exodus, okay, die Exodus, which is an open square before the city. All right, and they said, as many as you find, bid or call to the wedding. So this is the call to the wedding supper of his servants. And so the servants went out into the highways. And this in Greek is hodos. And hodos is the root word to Exodus. So if ex means to or from, and odos means the way. Okay? So that's what Exodus means. It's to the way, or from the way, or the going forth, quite often, okay? So his servants went into the way, or highways in the King James, and gathered as many as they found, both bad and good. Now, of course, how can you have bad and good at the wedding supper? Well, this is referring to the harvest in Revelation 14. There's two harvests. There's a harvest of the good, which is the wheat, and there's harvest of the bad, the evil, and that is the grape harvest, all right? And so they gather as many as they found, bad and good. Those are the two harvests. And the wedding, okay, gamos in the Greek, was filled with those sitting at meat, okay? So this here is actually giving us a very significant word of highways die Exodus, okay? And we'll see that this here connects to our view of the outer court area, the die Exodus, the open square, the open space that's in the outer court. All right, the wedding supper parable also tells us about the streets, the lanes of the city in the record of the wedding supper parable in Luke chapter 14. Go out quickly into the streets. All right, here streets is platia as streets, and we'll look at this, very important because it's in the prophecy of Daniel 9:25. It's also the word used in New Jerusalem in Revelation 21 and 22. So it's a wide space. It's a square. It's a square, okay? Go out into the streets. It's really go out into the square and the lanes, okay? Rhyme in the Greek, which is an alley or a street, and in this case, relating to the promenade of the city. Then bring in the poor, the maimed, the blind, the halt. Okay, well, who's that? Well, we do know that the poor, the maimed, blind, the halt are in the resurrection, because a few verses earlier in verse 14, it says, do not invite your friends to the feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the blind, the halt, and you will be blessed at the resurrection. So that's meaning that the poor, the maimed, the blind, the halt are those in the resurrection. And who is that? It's the 144,000. All right, these are the first at the wedding, because we see the 144,000 in Micah chapter 4, gather the afflicted, the halted, the cast out, and Yahweh will reign over them. All right, this is referring to Revelation 14:1 in Mount Zion. Okay, and again, it says to her to go forth out of the city. All right, so what's in the city? The square, the lanes of the city. And what we're going to suggest is that these streets and lanes of the city are also referring to things in the inner court. So that means that the poor, the maimed, the blind, the halt go forth into the inner court. Go forth into the inner court and bring them in. Bring in the poor, the maimed, the blind, the halt. So they were brought in first, okay, in Luke. Then the messengers, the servants, go out again and say, go out into the highways, the hodos, and the hedges. All right, so hedges is a wall. It's a wall of the sheep, all right? And we can see the Greek word here is very important for us. We'll look at this, but fragamos, all right? And that's hedges, okay? So when we take a look at the Greek words here, we do see design elements of what we see in the Ezekiel temple. And so let's take a look at those in these streets in the Exodus, okay? Streets, Exodus, which Exodus, as we mentioned before, combines two words, ex, okay, of or from, and odos, the way. And amazingly, Psalm 144, has these words in it. If we look at, see, ABP here means Apostolic Bible Polyglot. So we're reading the Greek Old Testament like the likeness of a temple, and their storehouses are full. Their sheep, okay, remember how we said the hedges were for the sheep, are prolific, multiplying in the streets. All right, multiplying in the streets. Well, streets here is Exodus. And there is no ruined hedge. All right, hedge here is the same phragmos that we saw hedge in Luke 14, verse 23. So this is clearly fulfilling the wedding supper parable here in Psalm 144, because we have the temple, we have the streets, we have the hedges, and there's no cry in the broad places. Okay, this broad places, platis, this is a similar word to streets, platia, okay, the broad places. And that's used in Matthew chapter 7, verse 13, but similar to the street, platia. Now in Proverbs, it also talks about wisdom in the streets, okay, and also streets here is Exodus. Okay, wisdom in the streets sings praise, and in the squares she does celebrate. So again, the squares here is platia, is the same word for street. So what we're getting at, guys, is when we see multiple words, not just one isolated incident, but we're seeing multiple words of the streets, the hedges, in one piece of scripture, it is confirmed by another piece of scripture with the same exact words. So here it's talking about the temple, okay, the streets around the temple, the hedges, okay, so we showed you earlier the hedge wall, and we also showed you, the streets, the open, broad places there. Now, we also see this word streets very significant in Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. He says, know and understand that the going forth, or the exodus, all right, the exodus of the commandment. And so what we believe is that what we're doing is we're obeying the commandment. And what is the commandment? Again, shall be built the square, the street, the wall in the straits or troublous times. And so King James says, and the street will be built, and the wall even in troublous times. But again, when we take the Septuagint and we look at these verses here in Daniel 9:25, we see the going forth is the Exodus. Okay, there is an Exodus. There is this end times Exodus that the people must go forth through the wilderness again. And there is again a building of the temple. Now, of course, at this point, the temple that we can build is in 3D, and that's what we're doing. And we're rebuilding the temple in a way that you can see the measurements, as it says, to measure the temple, the altar, and worship in it, or those worshiping in it, in Revelation 11. Okay, so again shall be built the street or square, platia, and that's the same word we saw before, in the streets, and the wall in the straits. Now, straits here is stenochoria, and the root here of straits is the straight gate, stenos. So, we had a previous video on the straight gate, what relates to the straight gate. And here you can see we have the straits, or the difficult times of the end of days, but also in the context of the temple, okay, of the square, of the wall being rebuilt in straits, in the difficult times, in the tribulation, okay? So that's why there's things in the tribulation that are very exciting, okay, if you understand prophecy. That's why we teach prophecy. Okay, so now that we can see that the Exodus relates to streets, we see the Exodus in Daniel 9:25, and we see the street, platia, the walls and the straight being rebuilt, okay? So very, very exciting fulfillment of prophecy that we would once again look at the temple, look at its architecture, show the pattern, measure the design. Okay. Now, as we mentioned before, we want to make it clear on what the promenade and the peristyles are. So in Ezekiel 42, we see the word promenade, peripaton in the Greek, and we have the north chamber, and the promenade in front of them was according to the measures of the north chamber. So this is saying that there's a promenade or a row in front of the north chamber, or the building, according to the breadth, according to their exits. Exodus. Okay. Well, Exodus is exits. Yes, it's going forth. All right. Remember, in a few occasions, Exodus can mean a street. So we can also look at it is that the promenade is the street. Okay, it is the street. And its lights in their doorways or windows. Okay. Thus, the promenade is also in front of the north chamber according to the Exodus, which could be thought of as a street. All right, so this, of course, is what we see in the courtyard of the inner court, with the main feature being the promenade, being the road with covered pillars. And the peristyles. All right, so Ezekiel 40:17, and the peristyles in the outer court were, there were chambers and peristyles round about the 30 chambers in the peristyles. So again, peristyles mean columns in a courtyard, okay? A courtyard area, and then a porch or covered pillars over the going around the courtyard area. That's what a peristyle is. And here it says specifically, and the stoa were according to the gates. And the King James and the Hebrew text uses the word pavement. So we have a pavement there, yes, and we also have pillars or a stoa as well in the outer court area. Okay, so here we're clearly talking about the outer court, but remember in the prophetic significance, the Exodus, okay, the di-Exodus relates to the outer court, and the call of Christ going out, go into the di-Exodus, go into the open square, go throughout the city and bid as many as will come to the wedding supper. So that's what we are. We're a voice in the wilderness. Of course, when you teach the temple, the people run away in droves. So you guys are the remnant. You guys are the ones in the Exodus, in the wilderness. This is a wilderness message because Christ is the chief cornerstone, okay, but it's a stumbling block. So the temple is a stumbling block to the masses. So again, our notes, they will be, we'll make a blog post where we'll include the information here. With this, these notes will be posted, and as well, we'll now get into the spaces of the pillars. Back to the 3D model and the view of the peristyle of the outer court. Very exciting to share with you. And over there to our left, we'll also look at the inner court. And recall that the inner court is also reflecting the promenade as the Jerusalem Cardo. Now the Jerusalem Cardo, we have other videos. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a blog post. And in the blog post, we'll have the links to the notes here. And we'll also have links to the videos on the Jerusalem Cardo. So here, as we turn and we pan into the inner court, you see the covered pillars and walkway. That is the Cardo. And we'll show you the Cardo in Jerusalem. They are very significant for us in our research for the location of the temple. But here, again, we're just so excited to share with you the 3D model. So now we can say these things. We can talk about the pillars and porches and promenades. We can talk about the buildings and have life in the view of what these will look like. Okay? And here again, we get this awesome view of the close-up of the Cardo in the inner court. Scribe's chamber there to our left. Tall pillars there. King's house over behind us. And then we get this view where we turn and we pan over to the north chamber. Outside of the north chamber are kitchens. That's the hearths and the boiling pots. And here we have this view of being inside the Cardo, inside the promenade, and facing towards the east. Now we'd also like to explain briefly the spacing between the various buildings here in the outer court. This is actually really important, and it may not be something that you're entirely enthralled with, but we never know if someone's going to take this information and do further study into it and to really examine it. So we want to provide in the series of videos all the details of what we've put into the 3D model, including the precise measurements of the spacing between the buildings. So basically we get the measurements of the buildings, and once we determine that, they have to be placed in a precise order in spacing. So here we're looking east. This is the east gate. This is what's called a boiling house. And what we're looking at in green is the 30 chambers. So we have 5 chambers, and you can see in order to fit them within the amount of space that we have a spacing here towards the east. We have 9.1 cubits. Okay? We have around the boiling houses, this is always going to be a space of 20 cubits because it says there is a court around the boiling houses. And it's very important that we make sure we disclose all the information as to where we came with our rendering of the temple. And in this, we are positioned towards the west here. This is the western wall. This is the northern wall here. And at every corner there's a boiling house, and this is the boiling house in the west and northern corner. And it is 30 cubits by 40 cubits. And here you can see we have 2 of the 30 chambers. And you can see here we have a spacing between the chamber and the inner court. This is the inner court here of 12 cubits. And again, we have a repeat of the 20 cubits around the boiling house. And if we were to look at the north direction, and we look at the chambers of the 30 chambers that are along the wall of the north side and the south side, because they are the same, we actually have a spacing here of 13.875 cubits. Okay, so that's the spacing between the 30 chambers. And the other thing is that you can see the 30 chambers, the length here, 30 cubits by 20 cubits in this direction. They have a slightly different arrangement in the eastern, where it's 24 cubits this way and 30 cubits this way. Okay, so this page and document, this is on the all chambers, and basically goes into the explanation as to how we came to determining the spacing for the areas and spaces between the buildings, and thus the pillars. Okay, so in the east we have 9.1 cubits, north and south 13,875, and west 12 cubits. So the math in determining those spaces is here. If you'd like to look further at it, this is on the website in the Millennial Temple and the 3D playlist or showcase, and then underneath that you'll see the documents, PDF files. But we'll also have the notes for today in a blog post. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video on the courts and the courtyards of the temple. And again, as we walk around, we have the church, okay, here, and we have the two courtyards. We have the one here I'm standing in, and then we have the inner court. And so we're excited to be able to share this with you. We do like to show the fact that He has led us here to convey this message. And stay tuned. We definitely have more coming as it relates to the temple and more of the buildings and more of the information. So stay tuned. It's very exciting. Be sure to check the blog posts. Follow everything because it's an exciting series, guys. It's awesome. So glory to His name. We conclude as we always do. The voice came from the throne saying, "Praise our God, all you His servants that fear His name, both small and great."